Hello, everyone. This is Bentley from Kent, Washington. I'm back with Randy Reed for the second part of our major interview here, and this time we're gonna shift away from talking about Randy's awesome fish room and some of the problems with that thing and what you could have learned. Make sure you watch that. I'll have a link down below for it, and we'll do it in the end cards as well. We're gonna talk about something else that's kind of near and dearest to Randy's heart. He bugs me about it all the time inside of our local club, and that is CARES species. So, for those of you who don't know, Randy, what is CARES?
Oh man, I don't even know the acronym right now off the top of my head.
You don't need. We can go with the easy version.
Yeah, so the gist of CARES is what you need to still submit your photos for your submissions. CARES is a program that was started by Claudia Dickinson and some other folks from I believe like ACA. I want to say she was inspired by Dr. Paul Loisel, one of the talks that he gave at a fish club, and it's how can hobbyist aquarists help endangered fish or fish that are facing extinction in the wild. And one of the things that we can do, which is really unique when you start talking about endangered species, is that we can, we as aquarists can house them in our own fish rooms and our own aquariums, and we can try to breed them, we can try to share them, we can try to keep the species going, basically. One of the anecdotes that I've shared before is, if the white rhinoceros is endangered, or the Siberian tiger, or pick your big, sexy mammal that people like to talk about, you can't just have one of those in your backyard and try to breed it, right?
Dang.
Like you can't do that. But with a Bosemani rainbow, you can get some of those in your possession. You can actually breed those. You can help to share that fish around your community, or maybe you put it on aquabid and you're able to move some across the country, right? So now you're genetically, like, you're actually moving that population across the country. So if for some reason they all crash in Seattle, you ship them somewhere else. So to be very long-winded about it, it's something that we can do. It's a program that you can partner up with. It's an organization that you can basically join and engage with, and encourage others and yourself to keep endangered fish, right? Like, so, guppies are super cool and awesome, but these fancy guppies are not exactly like a natural species that is facing extinction in the wild due to overfishing or an introduced species, or you name whatever catastrophic event is happening to cause potential species eradication. But you can keep some of the Gadiids, some of the Mexican Gadiids that are either extinct in the wild or they're going to go extinct in the wild. Like, those are actually out there in the hobby. So there is something that you can do, and it's, hey, do you have one tank? If you have one tank you could spare for an endangered fish. Sometimes they're not going to be community fish, and maybe sometimes they are, but what it gives people an opportunity to participate, I think, in species conservation.
Awesome. So I'll kind of preface this because I might reference some of these other things. Kind of in line with CARES at a more scientific level, you have things like the IUCN. You have CITES, for those who are familiar with CITES. That's, for us in the United States, that's the reason why we can't have Asian arowana, is because of CITES and the way that the federal government pays attention to CITES. And you've got lots of other organizations that are trying to do things to preserve these fish in other ways. They're not necessarily specifically CARES, but a great example, Randy has recently interviewed Scott Dowd from Project Piaba. So I want to dive into two folks like that, especially Project Piaba, because it's something that is unique and amazing that I don't think enough of this is being done, because it can change the way that we look at the world entirely when it comes to the pet trade. So the basics on Project Piaba. Why don't you give me kind of the most important rundown, given that you've interviewed the man himself?
Oh, I thought you were gonna do it. I was just gonna sit here and listen.
I'm gonna
So
cheat.
yeah, so Project Piaba, Scott Dowd, he, go back listen to the podcast or just check out Project Piaba's website. Um, he is a academically trained aquarist. He's got all sorts of science background and degrees and whatnot. He has a passion for fish, a passion for aquatics. And on a trip, and I think it was in the 90s, I want to say, he went down, his first time going down to South America. He thought he was going to go down there with his, thought, or actually, I think it was during while he was actually watching the collecting that he saw them scooping out and collecting so many cardinal tetras, like so many wild fish, that this has to be terrible for what's happening. Um, but as he says, he was very, very much wrong because one, what they were catching is just a drop in the bucket of the number of cardinal tetras that are actually out there. And more importantly, the reason why he was wrong is that if they don't catch these wild fish, then there's a handful of options for these people that are in communities and that are in cities like outside of Manaus, where it's like one of the major collecting hubs for the fish that they collect in the Amazon, the Rio Negro. The towns that feed into Manaus, those people they would either leave and go and do basically go to urban dwellings, so they'd go to major cities, or if they stayed, they would turn to practices like cattle, palm oil, or gold mining. So basically, deforestation practices, things that would damage the environment potentially permanently, right? So if you
Hmm.
can imagine, all right, so we no longer take wild cardinal tetras. We're either tank raising them or we've completely lost an interest. These people now no longer have an income. They have families, just like you and I have here. And you know what? You need to put food on the table. You need to have a shelter. You need to have all of these things in order to support your family. They're going to do whatever it takes. So I would do whatever it takes to put food on the table for my family. And so the whole goal of Project Piaba is how can we support this economy? How can we ensure that they are able to stay around and prosper and be successful while protecting the fish, but also protecting those people as well, so that they have a sustainable way to live and they don't turn to these other practices.
And I think I remember I listened to that interview really intently. I actually listened to it twice. Um,
There's a
and
lot of really good
yeah,
stuff there.
it's there's so much
Yeah,
information, especially from Scott. I mean, it's
yeah.
it's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to link it at
Wait,
the
not from me? What?
yeah no no, no. But and I know I'm going to get this backwards, but it's basically save a tree, buy a fish. It's
No, I
kind
think
of
that's right.
a
Yeah, yeah,
slogan
no.
that he has because not only are
Buy a
you
fish, save a tree.
yeah,
Sounds like
it's either buy a fish, save a tree, or it's save a tree, buy a fish. I'm probably wrong. It wouldn't be the first time that I was wrong. But it's such an interesting view because especially listening to his story, where he goes down there thinking, oh, this has to be ruining the wild population, and then you realize a great example of this is if anybody has ever seen Ivan McColgee's films. He's a guy who does YouTube stuff, but he's done tons of things in the Amazon, and you can see them schooling in the hundreds of thousands in the wild for like your all your tetras and your schooling fish. I mean, there's millions and millions and millions and millions of them, and the numbers that we take even for the aquarium trade are nothing. And a lot of these places that they will farm from are floodplains that will eventually dry out, and those
yeah,
fish would just die. They would never survive in the first place. But instead, it gives those locals income. It prevents them from destroying the environment, which would then destroy the river and the fish that we love. So it's this great, the Lion King, the circle of life in one
yeah,
way that where we can, if it's done correctly, wild catch fish and end up protecting them in the long run as opposed to ruining their native populations.
yeah. And I think one thing that just popped in my head too that we should clarify or we should throw out there. Let's say 100% do urban migration. So they all leave these areas and they move to Rio de Janeiro. They move to one of the other major urban centers in Brazil. So they are now no longer interacting with that environment, right? They're not turning to any of these destructive practices. But what happens though is now nobody lives there. Now nobody is kind of protecting it, if you will. So now maybe some people that move into the area and say, hey, we need to explore this place for gold, right? Because there's nobody there to stop them. So I think that's another way to look at this is that it's not that these people instantly want to turn to whatever is going to make them money. They may all just let's say they all just up and move to a big city and they don't want to do cattle farming or they don't want to do gold mining on their own, but somebody else may come in. And the fact that they have a presence there, I think Scott said that they actually are starting to protect parts of that forest, though parts of that area are starting to fall under national protection. That they can't do basically any of those practices in that area, and hopefully that's only going to continue to grow. That will expand. yeah, I don't want people to think that these people would only turn to just cutting down the forest. Some may, but I don't think we should assume that all of them would. And as I explained it, that's kind of the thinking back on how I explained it. Maybe that's something that somebody could take away from that.
Yeah,
So.
it's a great clarification because just because those people might not turn to practices that would destroy that environment doesn't mean that they wouldn't be forced to move away and someone else would move in and look
Yep.
at that place specifically for the purpose of taking advantage of that environment, whether it's creating palm farms or gold mining, logging, what have you. Just all the things that would completely ruin that portion of land that for right now is being fueled by the aquarium hobby as far as keeping those people in their places and having jobs and being able to support their families.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there's a what I think is a good reason to look at something like CARES as hobbyists. So what I want, because you are the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society's CARES chairperson, you run our CARES program. So for those of you who are in clubs, you might not have a CARES program, you might have a breeder awards program, you might have a horticulture awards program. If you have a club that doesn't have CARES, to you, what's the best reason to start including CARES in a local club? Or as
Well,
a person maybe who doesn't participate in it, that maybe because they don't know if their fish is a CARES species, what's the best reason to start looking into participating in that?
well, if your club, let's take the first one, the first part first. If your club didn't already have a CARES program, and maybe you're on your club's local board, why would I want to go through the trouble of having another program? It's another point of engagement. So if the warm fuzzy of encouraging people to keep endangered species, maybe having a tank dedicated to that as opposed to guppies or mollies or platies or any of these other fun fish that we like to keep, if that warm fuzzy aspect alone isn't enough, which again I would assume that most people that are in this hobby that consider themselves as aquarists lean a little bit more towards that conservation kind of bent to begin with. Um, Assumption, I feel like that's a true
I
statement.
think it's a pretty safe one.
Uh, but so again, if it didn't though, it's another point of engagement, right? It's one more thing for you as a board or as a committee to engage with the people in your club to get them to participate. I think I see this in our own club. My initial pitch for people to join their aquarium club was to go for the auctions, right? Auctions, great stuff, great deals, variety. You can get plants for super cheap. But now I want to challenge our club on how do we make it more engaging? How do we make it more social? How do we make it more of a community? Because even at our own club meetings, people show up and they just kind of sit in their spot and they don't really do much. They don't really say much. So this could be just yet another point where people can connect with each other and they can share their experiences. And hopefully, if your club feels like it's kind of everybody's in their own little world, they're just waiting for the speaker, they're just waiting for the auction. This is another thing, another point of interaction for them.
Great. So let's go to the second part. Let's say that for some reason I'm not participating in CARES. And maybe I don't know that my army of rainbow fish are all CARES species, or I only keep guppies. That's my thing. Why would I dedicate a tank to some CARES species? What do you think in your mind is the reason why me, the aquarist who isn't participating, should?
Who isn't participating should participate.
Yeah, why should I get into CARES? What aside from if I really like the conservation bent, what what makes it interesting enough that it either creates some kind of challenge or some personal growth? Like to you, what is that reason? What's that reason to jump into CARES?
I honestly, I really think that with cares, it's going to come down to you have to have that kind of inner warm fuzzy when we talk about conservation.
Okay,
You
that's
know,
fair.
so I've modeled our cares program to be in line with our Breeders' Award program. So it's points, it's tiers, you get an award. You get prizes once. Maybe I don't know. We still need to work out the prize thing. You get a thing of fish food if you get an award. But if you don't already inherently have that warm fuzzy for conservation, then I don't know if CARES is going to do it for you, like a Breeders' Award program, where you're like, man, I've bred the most of this. I am bad ASS, like
Yeah.
give me all the points and all the goodies, which I think is perfectly fine. Like I'm an incredibly competitive person, so BAP also kind of calls to me as well. But I
Oh,
think
are we gonna have to create a? Are we gonna have to create a challenge here, Randy?
no, because you're gonna beat me unless it's
Not
something
not in plants though. It's fair. It's fair.
yeah,
Not
not
plants.
yeah, certainly not in plants. Um, yeah, so if again, if the warm fuzzy isn't there for you, I don't know if you're gonna get much from cares, because it's very much a warm fuzzy that you are helping a fish that is potentially facing extinction out in the wild, and you could have some of the last living specimen of a species. Like if that isn't like, whoa, that's kind of cool, man. I think I want to sign up for that. Then I don't know. Yeah.
I say for me, like I think part of other than the fact that by nature of me being a rainbow fish nerd, I kind of fall into care species just whether I want to or not. In that 50% of all the rainbow fish are care species as is,
Hmm.
or at least the ones that have been scientifically described. There's a lot that haven't. I would look at it as the opportunity to try and poke at someone's collectoritis. Because if I've got that person who's like, I only do guppies, it's like, well, you do live bearers. Goodieds are live bearers, and they're really cool and colorful, kind of like guppies. Maybe you should try goodieds, right? That's I used to work in marketing. This is how
Sure,
my
sure.
this is how my
Yeah.
brain rolls. But for you folks watching, um, I totally want to see comment below what care species you keep, or if you don't keep one, which one do you want to keep? That's what I want
Well,
to see.
so a good thing to ask and to clarify is how do I know if I'm keeping care species? So you can go to, I think it's caresforfish.org is their website. Bentley, you do the work and have the notes.
I will
So do
definitely
that.
link it down below, but
Yeah,
I'm
do
fairly
that.
confident it is caresforfish.org. In
So
fact, I will make sure.
it's called the priority list. So you go to the priority list and you can check by genus. Maybe it's the grouping even above genus, but nonetheless, like you see by the different fish types. You can go in there and actually see all the fish that have been classified by a care species coordinator. So somebody on Claudia's team, like Greg Steves, who I've interviewed, I think he's responsible for either all of cichlids or the Lake Victoria cichlids being classified. Um, and for GSAS, I take it one step further and I say, okay, anything that you keep on that list or anything that's considered on the IUCN from like threatened on to like extinct in the wild, right? If it's completely extinct, then obviously you don't have it. If you do, let's start telling some people. But so there's a little bit more leeway. Like for example, what's one fish that I think like the pea puffer actually. I think the pea puffer is classified on IUCN as an at-risk species. So for GSAS, that would count. If you got a pea puffer,
Yeah,
you can participate.
I think almost all of the
Yeah,
African puffers are on the IUCN list
yeah.
in some way, shape, or form.
Hmm. So a lot of these fish actually, when you come to really look into it, like a lot of fish that are just naturally non-hybridized or line-bred fish that come from these developing countries are potentially facing some extinction. Like everything in Madagascar, like any freshwater fish in Madagascar is going to be on these IUCN and these CARES lists.
Yeah,
Pretty much
it's
all of the Rift Lake cichlids are on this list. So if you keep any African cichlid, it's probably a care species.
yeah.
Um,
A
so
lot of rainbow fish for similar reasons, and a lot of these reasons. Just in case you folks don't know, one of the biggest reasons for this is that a lot of food fish have been introduced. Tilapia tends to be the most common one to these water systems for the locals to fish and use as their food source, as opposed to those silly, colorful, ornamental fish that aren't good for eating. And then those tilapia decimate the native populations, and you start seeing things like a great example would be the emerald rainbow. So the Glossolepis wanamensis, Lake Wanam, they introduced tilapia, and in the last major collection when they went to save these fish because they are effectively endangered in the wild, if not completely extinct, they were only able to catch 80 out of the lake. And there's several other fish like this. There's tons of cichlids that are basically just gone because of the introduction of food species fish. So this is this is kind of the way as we as hobbyists have an opportunity to quite literally prevent species from going extinct.
Yeah, yeah, and there may come a point where Lake Wanamensis, they've eradicated the tilapia, and it could be an environment where they could reintroduce those fish. Well, guess what? If you're a CARES participant, you have that species, and you've been breeding it and sharing it. We now, are helping to ensure that that fish is something that can be reintroduced. And Greg Steves had talked about, there's been some species reintroduction attempts, I think, with gadiids and some other fish.
Mm-hmm.
Some have been successful and some have not. So even all the more reason to make sure that we keep those fish going. And if you're thinking like, well, I'm not. Let's continue on the rainbow fish thread. I'm not a rainbow fish expert. Gary Lang, he's the rainbow fish guy in America, but Gary Lang is just one person. Like,
Yep.
what happened? God forbid some bad thing happened to Gary Lang's fish room. Like, we can't just rely on one person to have the like species arc, if you will. We need to try to spread it as much as possible. And one thing that Greg Steves talked about is, it's something for the long term, right? So if you're going to decide to keep a care species, keep the fish for the long term. Like, don't. This isn't going to be like a turn and burn, a fish I'm going to have for a few months and then I'm just going to give it up. Like, really put on your conservationist, your naturalist hat, and pony up that tank for for the long haul.
Yeah. I kind of want to go part of what we talked about with what Project Piaba is doing. So I am almost curious if we could take your Project Piaba model and apply it in other places. Would we see less of these food fish being introduced, or potentially see a shift to where it's like, we don't need these food fish anymore in this lake. We need that cichlid. We need
Yeah,
that rainbow fish back in this lake because they'll pay more than that food ever is worth, and we'll be able to buy significantly more.
yeah. So that's actually one of Project Piaba's goals. It's they started in the Rio Negro, but they want that there are global species that they have targeted and identified that they want to roll this out to. Like, I even think the licorice gourami and all these other Southeast Asian fish from Borneo or whatever those guys come from. Lawrence Kent gave an amazing talk on that, and I feel terrible for not exactly remembering what country and whatnot that these fish came from that he went searching for. But if they're able to, exactly like you're saying, prop up that kind of model in these areas and give their locals and give the natives something to turn to other than just selling their land or letting palm oil come in. There's an opportunity there. So that's definitely on their radar. And what Scott had talked about, and he asked for my permission before we even broached the subject on the podcast, was talking about a GoFundMe. Talking about
Yeah.
some way for people to contribute to Project Piaba. He's going to follow up with me once they get the details worked out on that, and I've already committed, dude. I'll give you money for that, absolutely. I'll be one of the people to donate, and I'll make sure that we share that around. And I've met Scott in person. I've had conversations with him on the phone. I trust him completely, and the rest of that organization, and I know other people that interact with Project Piaba, and I completely trust them as well. And I'd absolutely trust them with my finances in that respect.
Yeah, and I would hope that some of the other organizations, a great example would be ANGFA, the Australia New Guinea Fishes Association. So primarily they do rainbow fish. And for those of you who've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I've told the story of the Running River rainbow fish, which basically was saved by ANGFA. And non-native species had been introduced. Those rainbow fish started to hybridize, and it took a small group of scientists on a what would seem like a minuscule budget to the rest of us in the United States or Canada, but as far as they're concerned, it was all they would ever need, which is something like $11,000. And they literally prevented this fish from going extinct by hybridizing and moved it and reintroduced it into the wild. So this is, it's kind of like I would hope that we could see over time some of these other organizations working together, because this isn't just we like pretty fish in our fish tanks. This is our ability to, for those of us who do care about the conservation of the planet, this is our ability to save things that we might have destroyed in the first place.
So let's also look at it from the other perspective. What happens if the hobby declines, right? What if in the States and in Europe and in Asia, our interest in keeping these fish declines. Like it's the hobby is nothing like what it was. You can talk to Rosario LaCourte,
And the
what it was
golden
like.
age.
Yeah, what it was like in the golden age. If we continue to, if we can't get our youth involved in this hobby, if we can't get them to be passionate aquarists like we are, then Project Piaba is doomed. Right
Yep.
there's going to be no money coming in. Nobody wants cardinal tetras anymore. Nobody's interested in it. We'd rather have it's like Ready Player One. We'd rather have our virtual reality headset and go to the Oasis and do that instead of keep up a fish tank.
Yeah, I saw a
So,
fish tank in a
you know,
video game once.
yeah,
That
it's
was
like
cool.
yeah, we need to we need to focus on the demand side, and we also need to focus on the supply side. And maybe the advent of YouTube and all of this content out there to get people excited about fish keeping, maybe that's going to be enough. Maybe not, but there's two sides to the coin. Project Piaba is kind of on the supply side, but I think we also need to do our part on the demand side and make sure that this hobby is one that there's good knowledge out there being shared, that people are being able to be successful home aquarists, that are having good experiences. They're not having bad experiences where their tanks are getting wiped out because of bad information, or bad husbandry practices. So,
Yeah,
that's
that's one of the hard parts. I mean, there's all sorts of great programs out there. Our club, for example, does a tanks for teachers, and there's kind of a bigger one that's out there that tries to put aquariums into schools so that children are exposed to the aquarium hobby, just even in passing at a school. Because even if out of an entire elementary school, 3 kids get into the hobby that wouldn't have got into it, that's 3 aquarists we didn't have before. And if we can do that at every school, well, now that's thousands and thousands, right? And there's other things like you get people who have, whether they're veterans or have gone through some kind of trauma. You get folks who have been coming to the aquarium hobby to deal with things like PTSD, because it gives you that peaceful, that serene feeling. I think social media helps a lot of it. Like YouTube definitely helps, because the more we can push the hobby out and show people why we love it and why it brings us such joy, it can slowly get more. But the demand side is probably going to be harder than it is having the right vocal people trying to protect portions of the environment. So you bring up a really relevant point. Really
I
relevant
try to
point.
do that.
It's like you interview people regularly or something. I don't know. So we've kind of done a big thing on the fish side. I want to take an aside because, as you well know, I am a giant plant nerd. There's a side of this toward our aquarium plants as well. An example would be you and I are both going to the AGA in 2019, the Aquarium Gardeners Association. And they have a ban this year on Bucafe laundry plants.
Oh, I did not know that.
So basically, they're not allowing any of the booze in, because so much of it is irresponsibly farmed out of the wild and is destroying the wild environment for that plant. And it's mostly Borneo, just because that's where almost all that comes from. But there's kind of stands being taken by some of the organizations that are trying to reinforce that conservationist effort. And I think the more that information gets out, much like Project Piaba, where it's like, hey, no, wild caught fish does not mean you're ruining the environment. A lot of times it can mean you're helping the environment. I think the more that information is, just kind of a small aside for folks to think about. It might be one of the most popular plants currently, but at the same time, a lot of it is being very irresponsibly sourced. And now, if it's in a tissue culture, you're fine. You're fine. It's being scientifically cloned, and you don't have to worry about it. But any of that, like, it has 700 names to try to describe a plant that looks the same as this other one with 5 names. Most of that's being irresponsibly harvested out of the wild. So we think about these kind of things, right? We can save supply, but we also have to build demand. We have an ability as aquarists to take an active role in conserving these fish. So if we don't like instantly dive in and go, okay, I want to start keeping Cares fish. To you, is like waiting for that Project Piaba GoFundMe or some similar things, like ANGFA takes donations to try and help a lot of the rainbow fish. I think there's a cichlid organization that does the same. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not a big cichlid guy.
There's the Stuart Grant Foundation for I think it's Lake Malawi.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, Odd Konings is a big proponent of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. He is like the cichlid guy. So those are a couple of ways. Is there any other way that you can think of that we hobbyists can pitch in other than just pick up a Karis fish and try them out? Which to me, that's
Actually,
the best one. Pick up a Karis fish, try them
yeah,
out.
yeah. One of them is actually supporting like PJAC. So not necessarily like the naturalist conservationist route, but more to protect the industry as a whole. So PJAC is basically like what is it? The pet industry something something. So PJAC is like the lobbyist arm of, and lobbyist is a terrible word to use with all sorts of negative connotations, but it's like the public policy arm of the pet industry. And one of the state of the industry talks that the president or vice president of PJAC he gave is basically that the fish and pet industry in general is under attack. I'm specifically talking about the fish industry. The ability to uh, collect fish, native wild fish in Hawaii, is under attack. The whole ban on that, and
Yeah,
talking about
that's
all
been a
the
huge thing in the hobby since they did
yeah,
that ban in Hawaii.
and they talk about all the bad science that went in and basically funded that study. Where they have all sorts of other studies. It's studies versus studies or studies versus a study on why that was a bad decision. And so, and then also pivoting then and talking about things like a whitelist. So I had Sam Rutka on, and Sam talked about the whitelist that they have in Maine. So you basically, instead of a blacklist where it's, you can't keep an Asian arowana and, five or six other species, it's no, no, no. Here's the species that you can keep. And so having to go through the government to say this is going to be what's approved and can be on is much more burdensome and much more difficult than a blacklist, which is here are the few species that you can't keep. Everything else is on the table, right? Especially in our hobby, they discover new fish all the time. All of a sudden now, because they're not on the white list, you can't get them. But it's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing as this species. It's just coming from a different collection point. Oh, no, 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 that's not on the white list. So that's something. And so, again, being very long winded, supporting PJAC, supporting groups that help to support and protect our industry as a whole is critically important because this thing isn't going to survive with just cardinal tetras and just rainbow fish. We need to protect the industry as a whole so that everybody can be involved and people can keep their bichers, people can keep their riff lake cichlids, people can keep saltwater fish because again I've
People
talked about
outside of the United States can keep Asian arowana
yeah. So
because they were near extinct in the wild and now they're pretty thriving.
yeah, because I mean, if we start chipping off portions of the Aquarius hobby, whether it's let's take fresh and saltwater combined. If we start chipping off segments and people start leaving because they can't keep the species that they want to keep, or they can't keep the plants that they want to keep, that's a disincentive for manufacturers. It's a disincentive for retailers. And if the profit's not there, then they're going to switch to other stuff, right? It's just like to take it back to Project Piaba. If the money's not there, those locals are going to do other things. Let's jump forward here. Mars Pet or Central or any of these big companies that produce these brands of products that we use. If the money's not there because the people aren't there, then it's all going to go away.
Yeah.
And ANGFA, Stuart Grant Foundation, all of this stuff just implodes because the larger hobby is not surviving. So I think if I were to say who to support, look up and see how you can support PJAC and look at how you can go and see if you can donate to them for their fight for the hobby as a whole, as opposed to a very, very, very slender segment. Do both if you can, but if you're just
Yeah.
asking me for another place, I think that's something that we don't look to that. We don't look to the hobby as a whole. We just assume it's going to be there for us, and I think that's a terrible assumption to make in this day and age.
Yeah, it's a good thing to think that also, you don't support doesn't mean you have to send hundreds of dollars. Like
No, no,
ten
yeah,
bucks can mean a lot to some of these organizations,
yeah,
especially if it's not just $10 once, it's $10 1,000 times.
yeah.
That adds up real fast, right?
Yep.
Um, so one last thing that I want to poke on, we'll do two questions. First off, let's say somehow someone wants to now keep care species because they've decided like this is awesome. we're saving the environment, we're saving the wild, we're preventing things from going extinct. What's the two that you would say, this is what I want to keep?
Oh man, what are the two that
The,
I want
the
to
the
keep?
evil question. What are the two that Randy would say to keep?
I, I have this like I want to keep the ones that nobody has, like, and I don't even know what species that is. Like, so the white cloud minnow is on the CARES list. Like that's on the IUCN list of species that are in extinct in the wild or they're endangered in the wild. I think it was a dam they built in China.
Yep. And you
Um,
can't keep them in Canada.
oh, you can't keep those in Canada?
No, they're considered an invasive species in Canada.
I'm pretty sure they will just die in the wintertime.
No, they can take really cold temps.
Oh,
You'd be
they can
surprised.
take cold temps. That's right.
They can go
That's
in frozen
right.
over ponds. They don't care.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you can't keep white clouds in Canada. That's
Unfortunately,
fine.
not in Canada. Even though I
Yeah,
know plenty of Canadian folks are like, I just want white clouds. I love white clouds. I
they're
just
pretty
want them.
cool. Yeah, I've got a tank of them. Um, that. So again, that's one of the species that like you can buy for like 20 cents a pop at your local fish store, right? So
Yeah.
there's almost like it's out there so much that it's not as alluring to me. But keeping something where it's like there's only like two dudes that have this fish and you're going to be dude number three, like that's super cool. But that's, I don't know, that's kind of a bad attitude to have. I don't know. I mean, it's whatever kind of fish you're into. I mean, there's going to be a care species for you. um, I wouldn't be surprised if like the Shodentai puffer, is somehow ended up is put on the IUCN list. The only reason it's not is because they can't really get into the Congo, just given the turmoil that's there. Um,
It's not the safest place in the world.
no, no, it's not. It's not. Um, yeah, I don't know, Bentley. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to let you down. I can't really think of.
Well,
Um,
I'll list a couple that I think are awesome to
yeah,
keep,
yeah.
and they're not all rainbow fish. That's the crazy part. Most of them are actually live bearers. So I think I'm probably going to butcher the scientific on this. The Zoogeneticus tequila, so
Oh
the
yeah.
tequila goodiad, which is a absolutely amazing fish. I don't keep them, but that's because there's a ton of them in our club. So one extra keeper in Seattle doesn't matter that much, but several of the friends in the club keep them, and that's how I go see them. And then two, I love the Yucatan sailfin molly that Greg Sage
Mm,
has because those
that thing is
things
crazy.
are
Yeah,
insane, and
yeah,
they get like 5 inches. They get
yeah.
huge. Those are
Yes.
two
So
of my big favorites.
that's a good plug right there. I mean, Greg Sage at Select Aquatics. You can go there and pretty much everything he keeps is well, except for like the green dragon longfin plecos.
Yeah,
Um,
all the live bearers are
yeah,
Charis species.
all of his live bearers, and actually, uh, Jose Gonzalez that I interviewed on Gadids, I have Gadids from his personal collection. So Carcadon, I think it's the Carcadon lateralis.
Very cool fish.
He sent me two trios of those, and so actually so I have them in my possession, and I would highly recommend if you were to keep a species, a Gadiid is super awesome because they are a live bear, but they have that different fry development like birthing mechanism where they actually have like the placenta, so they are a live bear, but it's different than like a guppy live bear birth or development, and they've got a lot of personality. You do need to the recommendation. Not saying you have to, but the recommendation is you do a species only tank. I have mine in a heavily planted tank, and they really only come out to munch on the vibrobites. They love vibrobites. They're surprisingly picky, but they do get down on the
Ha-
vibrobites.
hashtag free plug.
Yeah, no, hashtag free plug. No, I mean, it works. Um, yeah, but I mean, they've got a lot of personality. They're just like they're weird shaped little blimp fish, but they're just spicy and like the girls are huge. I don't know, they're super cool fish. So I would definitely say like the Carcadon genus of fish, like look into those. There's the lateralis, there's the audax, I think is how it's pronounced. The zoogeneticus. I'll butcher the name too. That's also another cool one. But yeah, so Gadids would be a really really good entry into the care species, and you could do a nice 20-gallon planted tank. I think would be a fantastic starting tank for that.
Sweet. And then my final thing for you, in your one of your most recent interviews, you put out a challenge to YouTubers. So I kind of want to let you re put that out there just through my viewers because I think it's awesome. I plan to do a video here relatively soon for it. And if it's not obvious what I'm going to do it on, then I don't know how long you've been watching, but I want Randy to throw it out.
Yeah, so the challenge was, use your platform, use the reach that you have to promote something beyond your own channel. And I don't mean that to be in a cynical way, but I think YouTube people are always talking about they're always on the search for the next piece of content or the next type of video to put out. This may be a ratings killer for you. The YouTube gods may not love it, but I really don't care. So one of the things that you can do that my Aquarius podcast challenge to YouTubers is to promote things like Project Piaba. I think I specifically called out Project Piaba, but really any like conservation, ANGFA, Stewart Grant Foundation, like do a little bit of research, find a fish group or find a fish cause that's supporting something for either a fish species, preserving a fish species, preserving the natural environment that they come from, and just do an episode about it. Like inform your listeners, take a break from your product reviews or live streams or use your live stream as this format, whatever you need to do, like however you need to frame it. um, Use your platform in this hobby to do a really good thing, right? Not to say that you're not already doing good things, but use your platform to do this one good thing. And I think it would go a long way. I know Scott was very much, excited about me issuing that challenge out there to people, that, to drive up, whether it's Project Piaba or something else, he was very excited about that. I think it'd be cool if there were 30 videos about Project Piaba alone, right? Like, I don't think Project Piaba can get enough press. I mean, they're doing something so cool, and especially if they start doing this global reach. So then they are doing things like partnering with ANGFA, and then they're doing things like partnering with Stewart Grant Foundation, and all of these other really cool groups that are doing something. So yeah, that was my challenge, and I hope people take me up on it.
Oh, I will.
Excellent.
That that's a commitment, and if it's not obvious which one I'm going to highlight,
The Mexican Gadids.
totally. How'd you know? How'd you know?
I like
um,
a book, Bentley.
what's really funny is I like those fish a ton, but there's so many of them locally that I'm like, I'll stick to the
See,
rainbows.
I'm gonna call you out on that. What happens if we get a power outage, so all of them locally die, and now all of a sudden now we went from having, yeah, see, you
It's
you.
it's more that I need my fish room built, which we talked about previous
So I'm gonna get
part
a
of the interview.
trio. I'm gonna get a trio of them, and I'm gonna find an empty tank, and I'm just gonna put them in there in your house.
Oh, now
And then you're just gonna have them.
I might be fine with that on the Lateralis. They're really cool. They're
They're
really
pretty.
cool fish.
They are pretty cool. They are pretty cool.
All right. So again, Randy, thank you so much for taking your time. I know that we're both busy fellas, but you're a busy fella who has a family, so that's extra busy. um, Thank you so much for the amazing interview on your fish room and some of the trials and tribulations, but also the successes there, and more importantly, something that's a little near and dear to us bowheads, which is things like Kara species, Project Piaba, ANGFA, the IUCN, and how we as hobbyists have an opportunity to save entire species and more importantly impact our world.
Yep, absolutely, Bentley. Anytime, man. I really enjoyed it.
As always, guys, thank you so much for watching and stay awesome.